I don't know why, but there's a strange lack of videos, or indeed actual documentaries out there, about children's television in the 21st century. The closest we've gotten is either BBC4's Children's TV on Trial, which remarks about children's TV from the 50s all the way up to the then present day, or a rightfully angry documentary about the misconduct that happened on the sets of children's sitcoms from Nickelodeon back in the day. However, more closely at home, in the UK, I managed to find a supposed documentary all about CBeebies, a channel that people my age, or slightly older, or younger, may remember as the home of an endless supply of preschool goodies. Entitled What Happens to CBeebies, it's based off of a similarly edited, narrated, and scored video about challenge TV from Pomerak Child, which I highly recommend you check out. Unfortunately, this video didn't exactly do CBeebies justice in my opinion, with loads of misconceptions, downright incorrect points, and a lack of understanding about how children's entertainment in the UK has evolved over the years. So, without wasting any more time, let me delve into this video and its content and point out the stuff I kinda agree with and mostly disagree with.
Back in the 1990s, CBBC One was the #1 place for kids TV, with the likes of the Teletubbies and Tweenies dominating all day. A similar thing happened in the United States, when PBS Kids was launched. Thanks to shows like Boo Bar, Barney and Friends, and Caillou, it was the #1 kids channel in the world.
Okay, just for clarification, it has nothing to do with the nature of this so-called documentary. PBS Kids is, for the most part, not a channel. It's a programming block that is shown daily on PBS, with some PBS stations operating a 24/7 cable service. I'm sure PBS Kids is only mentioned because between PBS and the BBC they're quite similar, apart from the whole member stations thing with PBS and the fact that they primarily broadcast educational, fine arts and dramatic content, the latter mostly with British shows from BBC and ITV, but all of this is besides the actual point. Carry on.
It was the #1 kids channel in the world, until CBeebies was launched in 2002. It went from this, to this, to this. What happened to CBeebies? A channel full of promise that has turned into a channel full of unoriginality and a sudden lack of variety.
Mate, have you looked at the schedule recently? I'm sorry, but we'll get back to this later. Just remember that he said the channel now has, quote, a channel full of unoriginality and a sudden lack of variety.
If you were born in the early noughties, then you probably don't know what this is. But this is Ragdoll Productions, a production company based in Stratford-upon-Avon.
I think people born in the early noughties actually do know what Ragdoll Productions were, and still are today. I mean, the company was founded in 1984, for God's sake. They probably were one of the biggest players in 90s British kids TV, as they made a select few other shows like Rosie and Jim and The Magic Mirror. I'd actually be surprised if people born in the early noughties hadn't seen at least one show by Ragdoll. But then again, this entire ramble is besides the point. In fact, the first section of this video, after the intro, goes on entirely about Ragdoll, despite them not making anything for original for CBeebies until 2015. And no, Teletubbies Everywhere does not count. Notice how he even uses the little Law and Order sound effect too. How inspiring.
My favourite memory of CBBC One was the Teletubbies promo. It was very clever. If only CBeebies could do something like that in 2025.
I beg your pardon? Your favourite memory of a block of shows broadcast on a daily slot either in the morning or the afternoon on Britain's national broadcaster is a specific promo for a specific show that somehow solos CBeebies in the modern day by merely existing and being clever? Also, would you mind showing us this promo so we actually know how it can be clever? No? Okay.
On September 11th, 1999, PBS Kids received a major rebrand. It took 6 years for this rebrand to happen, but it made a massive difference to the channel.
I don't know why, but then he starts talking about PBS Kids. Again. Even though whatever they do has very little to do with CBeebies other than being made with young children in mind. He then talks about the fact that Teletubbies was funded, at least explicitly, in the United States, but it was more like Ragdoll was given money to make more episodes by certain companies and the usual suspects for funding public broadcast television in the United States once it was successfully flogged over there. According to Anne Wood herself, if your show is only partially funded in the UK, then it has to be a success in other countries, otherwise you can't recoup the costs of making it. That's a simple explanation of it, if you actually cared.
On February 11th, 2002, the CBeebies channel was launched, and their slogan was Playtime all the time, with the likes of the Teletubbies, Bob the Builder, the Tweenies, and Bill and Ben all appearing in the launch promo. At this stage of the channel, they didn't just revive old childhood favourites, they created their own shows to broadcast on this channel.
Keep note of that last line in particular. He'll go against that logic but fail to realise it. Mainly we can blame that part of our brain that we call nostalgia. It's making us think that the way things work now are backwards to how things worked back then. It isn't. Evolution is a better word, since the children's shows that air on CBeebies now will be someone else's nostalgia in around a decade's time from now. It just has to be of decent quality, although one suspects and hopes that CBeebies understands what quality is in its over 20-year existence.
I looked on the schedule on the day of the launch, and it was absolutely stacked.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was stacked back then. But, like, it still is stacked today. Like, really. If you remove nostalgia from the equation, which admittingly is quite a hard thing to do for a brand like CBeebies, trust me, I've been like that, then the schedule is actually pretty alright, and pretty bloody decent considering some of the shite some individuals are pushing on YouTube and TikTok nowadays. I'll mention this again later.
In September of 2005, CBeebies introduced a new style of next bumper.
Okay, hang on. What is it with CBeebies fans and these bloody next bumpers? I've seen another video similar, but arguably worse than this one, and they bang on about the next bumpers too. Like, if there's any answer someone can tell me that can lead me to believe that the next bumpers are actually a secret code detailing the exact date that the second coming of Christ will occur, then please let me know, because the reason behind talking about these, if any, escapes me.
But they also ditched some of the old shows from the past. Back then, I thought it was a good idea, so they can bring in new shows.
Again, note that last line about ditching old shows and bringing in new ones. He'll break that rule too, so just keep watching, trust me. It all comes back to that word evolution, because like people and the infrastructure of London, TV channels and TV shows evolve with the times, whether that's in the schedule, presentation-wise, or the running of an actual show with a loyal viewer base. Evolution, if implemented properly, can work. Keep note of that.
In 2007, it was the start of the rise for CBeebies because they moved to a new home. It had a living room, a kitchen, a control room, and a bedroom. Even though they ditched the next bumpers in July, it didn't matter.
Yeah, it didn't matter. The next bumpers are not a key part as to why CBeebies of old is any better than it is now, which is flawed since CBeebies is aiming at an audience of 0 to 6-year-olds rather than autistic teenagers who remember these shows from their childhood and command that they be put back on television with little to no justification other than nostalgia. And by television I mean the television channel CBeebies, not just any TV channel.
It was around this time that CBeebies would start doing Christmas specials.
This line kicks off a somewhat lengthy look back at the CBeebies Christmas pantos, which, lest I remind you, they're still doing, albeit on a particularly smaller scale than before, but regardless. Not to sound like an art critic, but I really want to know why this guy thinks the channel itself has drifted off into a place that is apparently so bad he has to ask what happened concerning it. So I'll skip the panto stuff for no other reason other than fluff.
During this time, CBeebies were at their highest, and they were doing so well. But how long would that last?
To the present day, and indeed beyond all things considered. No other comment.
In September of 2011, they moved away from their original home, and they moved to the brand new CBeebies house in Media City. It was very nice.
The phrase, "it was very nice," said in that exact way sounds like a very backhanded compliment of an almost nostalgic nature, but I can't confirm it and quite rightly won't be anytime soon.
And on the panto side of things,
oh god damn it. This isn't even out of hatred for the CBeebies pantos per se, rather the fact that I barely remember them, and this is coming from someone who watched the channel during its supposed infancy. It's just that, when I consider what has changed about CBeebies for the worst, the Christmas pantos are just not one of them. I'd probably consider the possible lack of access for those who don't have access to CBeebies for TV channel for whatever reason. The fact that such a block for that exact thing on BBC Two has been relegated to one day of the entire week, and even dropped during Christmas. I mean, that's probably as bad as it gets for me. Other than that, the scheduling and shows seem fine as far as I'm concerned, but I'll let them talk a bit more.
despite the pantos that aired, a lot of the old shows that were on CBeebies had been purged from 2014 onward.
You don't say. In spite of that being a word-for-word extract from Pomerak Child's video on Challenge, it still kinda maybe does line up with the so-called bad years of CBeebies, even though if you look at the schedule from, say, August 2016, it doesn't look too bad. There's variety and different styles of show every few minutes, certainly more effort than Nickelodeon puts into its schedule nowadays, US and UK, mind you.
But in 2015, they took the next step and added some new idents. And surely that would mean a lot of the old favourites would come back again, right?
If the right audience is there, yes, but it's made up of 0 to 6-year-olds primarily, so probably not, especially in this current risky world of children's entertainment. Besides, if they decided to bring back Dirt Girl World, that would probably be considered some form of child abuse.
In 2015, they ditched the old idents that gave the channel life, and instead they replaced them with really bad updated ones.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
You mean the examples you're showing on screen? These exact examples? And you're saying that these new ones don't have life? I mean, even as an 18-year-old with a welcoming affinity towards naughty children's TV, and where I am, these islands aren't bad, like far from it. In fact, they rarely come across as anything less than boring. Like, how can you possibly quantify the idea that these islands are bad unless you had an almost blinding idea that the old stuff is better than evolving and changing with the times, even if it's for the better? It's like Dracula and Sunlight, but in this case Dracula is CBeebies fans, and the Sunlight is the very concept of evolution.
And don't get me started on the birthday ident. It scares the shit out of me, and that's why I'm not showing it on this video.
Right. I presume you're old enough to actually figure out that most of CBeebies' idents aren't actually designed to scare you, although I'm not quite sure if you've figured that one out yet.
The bedtime ident was okay too, because it was similar to the original.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Aha, there it is, folks. That's what we call in the industry as being hypocritical. He mentioned that ditching the next bumpers from earlier didn't matter because of the shows. Now he's glad that the bedtime ident is good because it was similar to what it was before. This implies that if they completely changed it, then he would have either disliked it or probably hated it. Either is likely.
The Goodnight song was still going, however, it was sung by a woman. And yes, it is very good. And there was light at the end of the tunnel, because one, Raven and Nina got married in the 2021 Scottish show Molly and Mac.
Other than the fact that this point concerns the private lives of two children's TV stars, it has very little to do with the channel itself.
And two, the Teletubbies were given a reboot with a new baby son and new Teletubby voices.
Yeah, and Anne Wood, who co-created the original show and founded Ragdoll Productions, described the company's sale to DHX Media, a Canadian media company, as a necessary evil. Even the controller of CBeebies concerning the nature of remaking old children's TV shows said that she had another, quote, 20 people asking why can't you just remake this. It's about a balance. You also have to keep doing new things. And she's right. Children's content still needs to evolve. It can't just keep relying on stuff from the past unless it evolves with the times, like Sesame Street or, hell, even Tracy Beaker to some maddening extent. That particular franchise is for an older audience, but the evolving kind of concept stays true.
Apart from that, this is when I start to see the decline for CBeebies, because most of the old shows were gone. The likes of Buzz and Tell, Carrie and David's Pop Shop, Mr. Bloom's Nursery, Our Planet, and Space Pirates. They weren't there anymore. They were replaced with shows that aren't relevant or are completely boring.
When you say aren't relevant, what do you mean by that? I'm fairly sure all shows on CBeebies, even now, aim towards the preschool audience, which I assure you is guaranteed. As for the completely boring part, that's subjective. You may find them boring, but then again, you're not the target audience.
I don't know why they got rid of those shows. It's causing the loyal fan base to ditch the channel just so they can find the shows they want to see on YouTube instead.
Good! CBeebies, like I said, isn't aiming towards the loyal fan base of people who grew up with the channel. They're aiming towards the loyal group of toddlers who watch the channel every day. If you must insist on watching old CBeebies shows for the rest of your life, then do it on YouTube. YouTube and Internet Archive are a reliable place to find this sort of stuff. It's not the channel's responsibility to cater towards adults who just want to watch stuff from their childhood on said channel without question.
And if people aren't tuned in, they won't see the advertising you've put on during ad breaks.
Huh? Excuse me? Advertising? Unless you live on a mythical analogue planet where the BBC is funded by commercials, then it's fairly common knowledge that CBeebies doesn't have advertising in the sense of showing adverts by other companies, nor do the rest of the BBC channels for that matter. Another line that doesn't work in the context of this subject matter because, like I've said earlier, Pomerakchild said it first.
You're losing the kids you intended to market to. And because of that, you are no longer the home of kids TV, and quite frankly, you don't deserve to be.
CBeebies are doing a much better job than most other free-to-air kids TV channels in this country, which I must keep reminding you is sadly a slowly diminishing market from a commercial point of view. I think CBeebies has every right to call themselves the best preschool channel in the UK considering their schedule, if you're bothered to look, of course.
That's why CITV shut its doors, and CBBC is barely still going.
CITV didn't shut down because of its programming, it shut down because ITV is increasingly trying to best posture itself as
more of a content provider.
Hence why most of the CITV content you get is barely 2 hours of it on ITV2 each morning, and all of it is mostly imports. As for CBBC, we all know the BBC tried to kill it, and BBC4 by 2025, but their diabolical plan didn't work, because as the national broadcaster, the BBC probably recognised that if children still need their content on a linear network, that they should cater to them as a public service broadcaster. That's what the current Director of Children's and Education content at the BBC said. Even the BBC's COO, Charlotte Moore, has said that both channels won't close until they think they, quote, don't bring value to audiences. And considering BBC4 is ahead of BBC3, as is CBeebies in terms of monthly viewership, I'd actually argue that BBC3 is better up for the axe than CBBC or BBC4. And then he does the usual and complain that the 2023 rebrand is bland and all that nonsense. I'd argue it's actually charming if you look past the fact that the logo isn't exactly the most inspiring thing ever made. But anyways, continuing on.
And the one thing that infuriates me is the fact that they earned the broadcast rights to one of the worst shows ever, Cocomelon.
This is sort of true, it's on iPlayer, but it isn't actually shown on CBeebies itself, and if there's any sense left in the world, the BBC would quietly remove it on the basis that it has demonstrated to be roughly the equivalent of an addictive drug. At least they have Bluey. Like, how can you complain about the programming when Bluey is right there?
Plus, they revived Big Cook Little Cook, but with new female actors. It wasn't the same as the original, so it sucks.
That's incredibly one-sided, and it ultimately comes down to whether or not you watched it. Another case of nostalgia overwhelming common sense is all I can assume at this point. I personally haven't, so I can't comment, but I can't imagine it to be awful. It looks decent, and given all the right ideas, it has the potential to reach younger audiences again. You can get away with evolution rather than revolution, but all good shows need great ideas.
But once again, there's light at the end of the tunnel, because it's been announced that Balamory is coming back for a new series in 2026. I'm looking forward to that.
I'm fairly sure they're doing these revivals to shows that have the potential to work with the audience of now. Back in 2005, when the BBC cancelled Balamory, they openly said they did so to explore new programme ideas for the increasingly competitive preschool market, and still they made over 200 plus episodes, which is more than enough to syndicate as far as the Americans are concerned, even though I don't think it was shown in the United States. It's all about striking a balance between new original content and revivals of classics. It can't just be classic, 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 revival, then classic again. You gotta innovate and take new steps, which is what the classics did, as at the time they were original. Balance.
CBeebies, you're a great channel and you've got people who like what you do, but you're slowly dying and everyone is ready to leave you behind.
You mean people as in the general public of adults, or children, or people who remember shows from their childhood and can only seem to cope if it airs on a channel that has to cater to a specific demographic and not to older people of which the channel isn't made for. No one is deserting CBeebies, and if their monthly reach is anything to go by, they're actually doing a much better job than their competition, and even their own sister channels.
There is a solution to your mess. Embrace variety instead of focusing on non-relevant shows.
I'm sorry, but can you give me a clue as to what shows on CBeebies' schedule could be irrelevant to what its remit is? One look at the schedule, there's a large selection of short 5 to 15 minute animated shows aimed at children, as well as some live action stuff in there too. You consider this non-relevant? Really? As for variety, at most they'll go 15 minutes before putting on something different, and later in the day you get different stuff. This is a schedule from August 2025, for God's sake. Even I can see this has more of a decent weight to it in comparison to the likes of Narrative Entertainment, who almost see their schedules for Pop or Tiny Pop as merely an afterthought, all things considered.
How about broadcasting the shows that were successful back in the day and still have recognition to the present day?
We've already gone on about revolution and evolution and all that crap, but shows come and go as they please, and children may be attentive to that sort of stuff, but not all the time. They still show some legacy shows like Rara the Noisy Lion, Baby Jake, Octonauts and Postman Pat SDS. Overall, I still think kids would engage more in Go-Jetters, or hell, even Bluey. Kids engage with Bluey, same with parents, hence why the show is so popular and on CBeebies. A mix of revolution and evolution seems healthy, as long as it engages with the current tastes of children nowadays.
Proper scheduling. Have a different show every few minutes of the day.
I'm gonna stop you right there. I'm gonna stop you right there. We've been through this. CBeebies plots a different show at most every 15 minutes. Double episodes generally are either 5 minutes or 10 minutes, each which equals to either 15 or 20 minutes, but 15 is what I believe to be the average based on looking at the schedule. They still have content that's new to me, such as Football Fantastics, My World Kitchen, and whatever the hell Betty Buys is. As far as I'm concerned, this is proper scheduling, and a good way of going about a children's channel made up of primarily original content with sprinkles of imported content too. And, you know, it's the BBC, what can you do about it?
Promote your promotions. You want to get the viewers, right?
They are getting the viewers. One look at Barb will tell you that CBeebies averages a higher monthly audience in minutes than BBC Three, BBC Four and CBBC. I don't have exact viewer figures, but it very much paints a picture that doesn't even need to be painted. If you claim they are in need of viewers, then it's unwarranted, since the official website for tracking viewing data on television in the UK says it gets more viewers than 3 other BBC channels, so where's the issue?
Why not bring back the Carrot Club?
Oh my god, dog.
That's not even something that needs to be enforced. Now you just want nostalgia to leak back in. Besides, what person who manages children's content at the BBC looks at something as trivial and as obscure as the Carrot Club and thinks that it will engage with younger audiences? I'm not saying it won't, just, you know, it's questionable. Saying something like that is just a longing for the past, if nothing else. Not exactly great either in a medium as precarious as the recent slump of the British children's television market, which is a considerable concern.
And finally, bring back the next and after that bumpers, so we know what's up next.
Just look at the TV guide. This isn't even a reasonable suggestion as to how CBeebies supposedly collapsed, all because some bumpers from 2 decades ago are no longer utilised in their original form.
You pride yourself on being the home of kids TV, so show it. You're not the place to show Cocomelon, which you actually did.
Like I said before, Cocomelon never aired on television, but is on iPlayer. That being said, the content of CoComelon itself, as well as other children's shows that prioritise bright colours and fast pacing over anything else, such as other CGI shows like Paw Patrol, has been subject to criticism from psychologists and the like for causing overstimulation and severe withdrawal. It's definitely a concern, and dare I say I might agree with him on this point, that something as overbearing as CoComelon isn't a first choice that I would put personally on the iPlayer. It's just a shame that his other points are meaningless in the grand scale of things.
So those are your options. I don't know what you'll do, but I doubt you'll do the right thing.
If the schedulers have any sense left, which I'm sure at least 2 of them do, they'd continue as they were, because barely anything needs fixing if you observe the schedule for more than 5 seconds. So there it is, my take on this bizarre little video. It would be an understatement to say that this video got a few things wrong about children's television, especially here in the UK. The massive problem with CBeebies fans is that they're mostly comprised of 18 to 30-year-olds who remember certain shows from their childhood, either that or extremely young children. There's absolutely zero middle ground between the two. Videos with the word CBeebies in the name get loads of views, 30k at minimum and possibly hundreds of thousands at the most, sometimes even millions. Plus the comments section is filled with loads and loads of terrible grammar, and it's hard to tell who is a child and who is an adult at times because they all have similar usernames. And trust me, I learnt this the hard way when making a video about PBS Kids. Fucking hell, that was an awful video. The comments on this particular video are turned off. I haven't got a clue as to why this is the case, since the video isn't actually made for kids, so the likely answer is that he did it on his own accord. Probably. Still, that's not stopped me from making a video on it. And overall, as the case with most retrospectives on channels like CBeebies, nostalgia seems to heavily skew judgment, which can work for a channel like Challenge TV, where variety, personality, and most importantly legacy shows are desperately needed like the old days. But with CBeebies, the channel has a varied schedule, personality is practically a given, and the audience viewership is higher than 2 BBC channels aimed at an older audience. I really do think that CBeebies needs a proper retrospective that doesn't decry the current era of the channel as unvaried, boring, and all this other stuff, when it really genuinely isn't. Bluey is distributed internationally by BBC Studios, and airs on CBeebies and has gathered worldwide acclaim for being one of the best kids shows of recent memory. Not mentioning that in itself could ultimately be seen as either an error or a ham-fisted attempt to make the channel seem more bad than it really is. Look at this. One look at the schedule, like I've said, one look at the schedule will dictate why it's much better than okay. Great even, considering the target audience of the entire channel, let alone the actual shows. It's much better than CBBC's schedule at least.
Hey yo, what the f?
Even today, CBeebies is doing exactly what it set out to do, but really the question of his video was, what happened to CBeebies? Well, it evolved. And as evidenced by audience figures and the quality of the shows themselves, with even parents considering it an excellent choice when compared to the immeasurable hellhole that is YouTube and TikTok. See, I did bring it up. I don't know, maybe I'm the arsehole for not sleeping under a Teletubbies duvet while drinking out of a Bob the Builder cup whilst binging series to a bits of Bob, you arsehole.